Dan Abrams is the person you need in your organization. He's an amazing developer, an amazing video maker, and an amazing co-organizer of Helm Europe. Dan, Helm Europe wouldn't be the same without your involvement. And now you are also talking. Please, a huge round of applause for Dan.
Hi, so I'm Dan Abrams, as you can see on my lower third right there. And my great claim to fame in the Elm community is that I co-organize and do the videos for this event. And it's been a really amazing event so far this year. I'm just very glad to be here. Now, let me warn everybody that what's going to happen now may be a disaster, because what I have here on the screen that you can see is an Elm language remote controller for the recording system. I am directing myself right now. And there's some really fancy parts of the system. For instance, we have a robotic camera, and if I move, it should follow me a little bit. That's really cool, but I'm not going to take credit for that. That was Panasonic's engineers. This part here with the really bad UI is what I designed. I'm gonna take this little video window off now because I'm about to show this window on there, and it would be recursive, and everybody would get a headache. So you're just gonna have to believe me that this keeps working, and I'm gonna have to believe as well because I'm doing this totally blind. So let's deactivate my lower third. Give myself a 2-up, which means that I now have both my video here as well as the screen, hopefully. And this is making impossible video states impossible. Streaming live stream with Elm, it's a little bit of a misnomer because of bandwidth issues this year, we're not live streaming, but we are recording them to tape as if they were live streamed, and they'll be up quickly. All is the same, except we don't have the internet bandwidth to do it. So I came to Elm, I was already a video producer, and I was already producing live streams. And I was producing, in particular, auto show vehicle reveals, which are a really big deal. Companies spend a lot of money to show off their new car at big auto shows, and they spend some of that money to do rather sophisticated video productions of those shows. And I was doing those. And when I got involved in Elm, I wanted to start making tech conference videos, but I wanted to make them better, because oftentimes what you see when you see a tech conference video is just like, there's the video down here, and there's the slide here, which is kind of actually ironically what you're seeing right now if you're watching this video. But that's all you see. It's just that statically. Maybe there's some lower thirds that are added in post. There's not a lot of camera switching and so forth. And so we don't do that here. In this conference, we have 3 cameras. One of them is robotic. We get a lot of different angles. We have lower thirds. We have nice 3D effects that transition between a full screen slide, a 2-up, and a full screen camera. We have nice videos. We have nice interstitial slides if we're live streaming. And it's got fancy effects, cool switching between inputs, robot cameras. This is really hard. Normally on a big production, we're talking about, just to do all those things I mentioned, a crew of maybe 3 to 4 people. And in a setting like this, I have to figure out how to automate it and do it with myself and Olivier, our sound guy. It's really hard. I make a lot of mistakes directing these shows, and that's terrible because when I make a mistake, it means I have to go back in, I have to edit it, correct it. And I will say that I've generally been making about, on a day like this, in the old way of doing it, I generally make about 20 to 30 mistakes out of 4 hours, 5 hours of content that I have to go in and edit. And that's about a week's worth of work for me. I'm using a program to produce this video called vMix. It's powerful. It has a lot of options. It lets us do graphics. It lets us do streaming cameras. It lets us do control of these camera systems. I'm also using Panasonic motion control software. It's really complicated. This is the interface. It's a lot of options. On a show like this, there's probably something like 110 options you can have exposed at any given moment to pick the next input, the next lower third, the next title. And it's really complicated. And it's too much information for me. It's really hard. It's the reason I make mistakes is because I constantly have to be looking at 3 different things and choosing from every single option in real time while things are happening very quickly. And it's hard. That's why I make mistakes. There's too many choices. There's too many different areas to concentrate on. And I wanted to do more by presenting less. And so I made this remote controller. So instead of seeing 100 options right now, I really only have 4 options. I can hit this cut button, which will change from camera 1 to camera 2, or back from camera 2 to camera 1. I can preview camera 2, it's already previewed, but I can't go to camera 3 right now, because when I'm in a 2-up, I don't really want, camera 3 is on the audience, and I don't really want to see the audience in a 2-up. It doesn't really make sense content-wise for the video. But last year, when I wasn't using the system, there was a lot of times where I had to go back in and remove camera 3 that I had actually done during a 2-up, or during a lower third, or another portion where you don't want to have that. I also might want to go full screen. I don't actually want to do an edit where I change cameras and go full screen at the same time. That looks a little weird. So it will not let me, it will only do the camera that I'm currently on to do that. I'll go full screen for a minute. I can only do my lower third on full screen because it doesn't make sense to do it on a 2-up. It's just too much information and my name is already there. So I'll put my lower third up again. Just give it a second. Bring it down. Now if I go to camera 3, I can go to camera 1 or camera 2, or I can end the segment, because I often end segments on the audience, but I can't actually put up a lower third, or I can't actually go to a 2-up. Let's go back to camera 1, let's go back to the 2-up. From the 2-up, I can also go to slides. By the way, notice that this keeps, the words here on this button keeps changing from merge to cut to fade. Those are the different kinds of transitions that I do between these things, and the system is automatically telling me which one to use in this moment. I've pre-programmed it to do that. I go full screen to slides. Some slides I can't go back to just camera. I've got to go the intermediate step of 2-up. That's by design. That's what I want. So back to 2-up. So this is how I did it last year. vMix has built-in scripting using Visual Basic. It was a lot of nested if statements. I still made mistakes. I made fewer mistakes than if I didn't have any automation in it, but I still made a lot of mistakes. And it was really hard to write. It was a lot of testing. It was about a week of scripting, going back and forth. It didn't really force me to think. I mean, at some point, it forced me to think about the broadcast and what the show needed to look like, but it wasn't really getting me to think about my data or my model the way that writing in Elm does. And I made a lot of mistakes still with this automation, about half as many as I would have made without it, but still a lot. So the problem that I have in this user interface here, in the built-in interface, is the same problem we have if we're working in a language that doesn't have an Elm-like type system, which is that I have basically infinite options. It's a decision-making process. It's about, okay, what context am I in, and what subcontext am I in, and what subcontext am I in with that. And I have to keep all this information in my head. There's all sort of implicit things. It's a lot like working in JavaScript or BASIC or any of those languages that don't have an Elm-like type system. Too many options. So I built this remote controller, and I built a library to build these shows using types, specifically so that I could restrict my options, just as I did in the remote controller. So now, each possible screen that you might be in, a 2-up, a full screen, a lower third, which is separate from just a full screen camera, a full screen slides, a video, an interstitial slide, they're all a different type. And there's a decoder that gets the information back from the HTTP API that vMix provides, and it decodes and figures out what screen you're in, and based on that screen, it then has some contextual information. I build the UI based on that information. Great, right? This is what we're all doing all the time. Like, my state isn't really managed in Elm, but it's the same sort of thing. It's managed externally through this vMix server, and based on the state that's currently on the server that I receive from the API, I build my UI. That's what we do in our view functions all the time. And already this is like a huge improvement. This is going to be a much better system, much easier to maintain. It makes me think about my problem and the broadcast itself. To build my UI, I just do a pattern match on it. It's by definition exhaustive. Same thing with my transitions. I do a pattern match on what's the input that I've currently got previewed and what's the input that I've currently got running, and it gives me my information. Everyone here has done that, right? If you've worked in Elm. Way better. What we're working with here really is a finite state machine, and I'm not sure I'd quite define the Elm update function as a finite state machine because it's not really state, but it's something very close to it. If you've done pattern matching on a custom type in Elm, you've done something pretty close to a finite state machine. It's not that complicated. This is the diagram that I drew when I was learning about finite state machines to understand the show. This is actually the broadcast. Those are the choices I can make. This helped me think about the problem. It doesn't really have anything to do with Elm. It's just, draw stuff on paper. Okay, but I can do even better than I did before. So I have some information for each input, right? So for 2-up, I still have either camera 1 or camera 2 going. For my lower third, I have what's the string that's in the lower third. And previously, I was just using a record and pattern matching on it. But I can do even better because if I use opaque types where that information isn't available to other types, I can now make those impossible transitions impossible, right? So a full screen camera also has a full screen model. That model happens to contain what camera is it, but only the full screen module exposes it. So I can control that information. Same thing with lower third. It has its own information in its own model. So, and these models are opaque types. And the reason that's important is that when I create my transitions, full screen to lower third, I have to have a full screen model. If I'm going from lower third to full screen, I have to have a lower third model. The type checker is going to help me here. I know it's a little, is everyone following? The type checker is going to tell me if I try to construct a case where I'm in slide mode and I want to go to lower third, I literally cannot build that transition. The Elm type checker will stop me from building that transition. Now, I can still screw up the API calls and so forth, but once I've got a really good tested library for those API calls, I can manage all of my transitions. I can make impossible transitions impossible by requiring the type of the state that the screen that I am transitioning from. So our current scene is a 2-up. Let me make sure that that's true. Yes, it is. Let's say I have a function called doTransition, and I give it full screen to lower third. That's not going to type check because current scene is not a full screen model. That's cool. Like, Elm is saving me even more. This won't compile. Somehow Evan has stopped me from making mistakes on a thing that he knows nothing about 5 years after he created what he created. There's other ways you can guard this stuff. There's something called guards. What guards are basically is if statements. So for instance, if I'm just using integers to identify my camera, which is what I'm doing right now, I have camera 1, camera 2, camera 3. I want to go from camera 1 to lower third. I want to go from camera 2 to lower third, but I want to forbid going from camera 3 to lower third. So I do that with an if statement. It's called the guard. If you're learning about finite state machines, that's what they are basically. It's the if statement parts. It's better than before because it's not a series of nested if statements, but you can still make mistakes. For instance, if somehow the camera 4 got in there, I introduced a camera and I forgot to update this, maybe that's an impossible state. But I can do even better still by modeling my data even more specifically with phantom types. So, and this is the part where it may get really complicated. Go back and watch it. So I can have different types: type wide, type audience, type camera. Instead of just type wide, type audience. Instead of just having camera 1 and camera 3, I have type wide, type audience. And then I have a type camera A, which doesn't actually do anything with the type, with the parameterized type. A. And then I can have this show lower third function, and I require to have a camera wide. Now, it's not actually doing anything with that wide, but by saying it needs to be camera wide, I have obliviated the fact that I could ever do this with audience. I can never have that transition from audience to lower third. Again, the type system is going to check it for me. I don't have to go through and I mean, I should still go through and test, but I don't have to. And probably won't, given the way that these productions come together very fast. My UI is all about limiting my options. Limiting your options is good design. It's also good programming. That's what our type system is for. That's what Richard's talk was about this morning, was try to describe as specifically as possible your problem domain using the type system. Instead of saying it's camera 1, camera 2, camera 3, and just using an integer, make it camera wide, camera audience, camera close-up, or camera robot. The more specifically you can do that, the more the type checker can help you to make sure you've covered every single possibility and to make sure that you're not doing default statements to possibilities that aren't really going to occur. If you want to avoid mistakes, encode your data as types. I mean, that's kind of been an ongoing mantra today. So I'm glad that everyone did that. And it will make you happy. And let's see if we're still recording. Yep, we're still recording. So, oh, I have this note to myself. I have to go back to full screen. Let's give myself my lower third, because that's the end of my talk. Now I'm going to go to camera 3 because that's the camera I go on when we take questions.
Thank you. That was so meta.
By the way, this is like context switching between these two things is one of the most mentally challenging things I've ever done. It's possible I'm going to get up there and it's just going to be, the camera's going to be on the ceiling and...
That's okay. we got it here. So thank you very much for that. Does everybody have questions? Do you want questions?
Yes, but if it gets too hard to direct, I may say, see me afterward.
Okay.
Hopefully you're on camera right now. I can't see it, so I don't know.
So how did you build a list of the transitions? Like, did you just use this app while developing it and saying, oh, I could really use this one, but it's not allowed, so you just add a new case?
So I did, and I'm going to direct while I answer this question. I did this show last year, and I planned for it last year, and I did it this year. I know what the structure of the show looks like. I know what the successful transitions are in art. That's the creative part of doing this, of directing this, is designing the show in that way. I wrote it on paper and articulated what they should be. I created a limited set of it. That's frankly better for the aesthetics of the show, in addition to being easier to direct. It's one of those things where limitations, in addition to being easier, also help spur on creativity. Hang on 1 minute. Let me get you on camera before I answer your question.
So if I understand correctly, you are representing the state of this vMixer thing in your Elm application?
I'm sorry?
You are representing, if I understood correctly, the state of this vMix?
Yes. And that's one of the hardest things, is because I'm relying on the API. If there were tighter integration, if I were doing this in WebGL instead, I could really know the state of it. Whereas here I'm relying on a fairly fragile API.
So yeah, the question is, like, could it be that it gets out of sync?
Yes. So the API can, of course, get out of sync. If that happened, so there are parts of this, like the camera controls are not yet implemented in this. So I don't really know what's happening there, except I have someone stationed up there watching for me. And he's not going like this. So if, for instance, though, it was going to not, if, for instance, it tries to ping the server to get the current state of vMix and it doesn't return, this will just go blank, or it'll give an error message depending on what happened. So I know, like down here, I have the fact that it's recording, and multi-cording, meaning it's recording all 4 cameras at once as well. If those were to suddenly disappear, it means that within the last 20th of a second, vMix has stopped responding and it doesn't know what the state is. So it's using vMix as the single source of truth. I wish I could have a tighter coupling of those things. That's the next step. That's a big step. That's very difficult. We're going to have to go to systems programming of some sort. But vMix is my single source of truth, is what I'll say. Yeah, vMix server. Oh, I forgot to cut the. I was on you the whole time. I'm sorry. I gotta go back there now.
So this sounds like you've written this code specifically for this setup you've got here in Conference. Is that right?
Yes. So I've written a framework that I can build these things with, and this is my first time using it in production. But the idea is that if I do another show, which I sometimes do, I will be able to more rapidly build the next show. I've still got to define the types for that show, script it, but I was scripting it before too. So,
do you think though you might evolve this to something you can more generalize and have a config for each one that?
Yeah, that's possible. So one alternative, I forgot to cut back to myself again. I'm gonna have to fix this in post. I won't edit this one at all. So one possibility is, instead of doing it this way with the type system, is to build a domain-specific language, DSL, that has its own type system that's smaller, that does the same type checking, but that's very specialized to this sort of thing. So there'd be something that's like a markup language that lets you design these shows using a lot less code, and then auto-generates the interface for you from that, and type checks it before it does. That's not that different than what Mac Griffith did with Elm markup, except that it's a very domain-specific solution. Yeah, just having your own small language written in Elm that can produce this sort of thing, can generate this sort of code. Yes?
Sorry. Why Elm? You have another. You're running this on the desktop. You can use another type system, type language, functional language that is a graphical interface, another website. So why you choose Elm?
Yeah, so I've played with doing the actual, building my own version of vMix, just a more simple version in Rust a little bit, and a little bit in Elixir as well. You know, right now for prototyping, I'm most familiar with Elm. I like working in it the most. It's possible that I may just be using this to prototype, and eventually it'd have to be something that's a desktop app. Right now, it's impossible to get these video signals in directly into the browser, and even to do it indirectly is very hard, and the browser, of course, doesn't have the performance we need. Maybe that'll change with WebAssembly. So the answer is, yeah, I don't know. I've looked at doing it with Haskell. I've looked at doing it with Rust. Certainly, I couldn't have done the design. Like, the hardest part of this is to design a better interface. There are half a dozen software switchers that do this kind of thing that vMix does. I think vMix has the best interface of all of them. But I still think it's not nearly as good as it should be. It's not something that just anybody can use. My dream would be that, like, next year I have a solution that I come in with a camera and one computer, and like anybody in this room, I can give them a 5-minute tutorial and they can direct the whole show. I think with this interface they could. Right now I'm prototyping in Elm. Elm has a type system that I want that helps me do this. Could I do it in Haskell? Yeah, sure. It has a very similar type system. Probably F# and OCaml as well. Probably Rust as well. Probably Swift as well, for that matter. I think it would be harder to do this in Python. Elm's type system is a major boon for this. That's not unique to Elm because the type system is not unique to Elm. But Elm's libraries are also excellent for this, is what I'll say. Oh, and all the, as almost always happens, all of my UI is with Mac Griffith's Elm UI, because that's also awesome. So one reason why Elm is because Haskell has no like bindings to GTK that look as awesome as Elm UI.
Sorry, now the real question. Do you think the Elm is superior for interfaces?
For UIs, if you can do what you need to do in the browser, and you can do what you can do with Elm. That is, it's not something that needed to do extensive ports to do. Yeah, I think it would almost certainly always be my #1 choice. That's not to say other choices are bad, and there are perhaps use cases where you might want to use something else. But yeah, it's a great choice. It's certainly my first choice, almost always. Yeah.
One last question.
Would it be possible to just send all of the streams to the user and push the interface to the user?
I'm sorry?
Would it be possible to send all of the streams to the user and just have the user use the interface to see the stream as he wishes?
Yes, it is possible. So the idea is that instead of me mixing the show here, we send all the video streams to the users, and the users mix it themselves. I think that's what you're saying. I think there's two problems with that. One, it's like the limitation is bandwidth. And especially if you have the low latency that you need to keep things in sync, you need a lot of bandwidth. Probably we're talking a minimum of 50 megabits per second in 1080p to have 3 cameras plus a set of slides, plus some videos that have to play out. The other problem is that like users don't want to do that. And so early on, I played with a concept that was similar to that, where all we had was the slides and the switched video. So the user wouldn't switch cameras, but they would have 2 video streams, the slides and the cameras, and they would decide when they wanted to cut back and forth. And as I played with a prototype of that I built, you're not watching the video, you're playing with the tools. I think there's a creative part of it that's that the director should be focusing your information by choosing what you look at that moment. So, yeah, it's a good idea. It's just it doesn't work in practice.
The intention is really important too when you are directing.
Absolutely.
It's not because you have only 3 buttons that it's easier to click on one of the 3.
In a way, what I'm doing is just what I'm doing in a typed language. I'm moving my intention and my decision-making away from real-time at the time of execution and in advance to somewhere where I can plan and check and have the computer check for me that what I intended to do is what ends up happening. And that's awesome. That's like a way better way to do almost anything.
Okay, so I think we are done. Thank you very much, Dan.